The Compromise of 1877 mended the conflict between the Democrats and the Republicans after the disputed election of 1876 and prevented another civil war in America. However, the terms of the compromise also produced new conflict, particularly for slaves in the South, who lost the protection of federal troops and faced more powerful Southern state governments led by Democrats. While these conditions betrayed the recently freed slaves and propagated the continuation of segregation, the compromise successfully proved to the rest of the world that America was unified, civil, and able to solve internal disputes that might arise. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence officially formed the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton were some of the founding fathers who drafted all of the critical documents in America's history. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Federalist Papers provided guidelines as to how America should and would run. Among the most important decisions that America was to make during this time was how the leader of our country would be chosen. Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist Paper No. 68, outlined a democratic election system that would ideally reduce political conflicts in the future. This system is called the Electoral College. It prevents any single state or individual from having too much influence on election results. These long-lasting documents have provided stability for America. During the next 100 years, America experienced both peaceful and hostile events.
Slavery was practiced in many different cultures. The Southerners, before the Civil War, adopted the idea of slavery. A slave could be born, purchased, or sold into slavery. Slaves were the people of color. Slaves had no human rights. They were treated like property. If they didn't do their work properly or try to stand up for themselves, their owners, white Southerners, would harass and physically abuse the slaves. A common punishment was whipping. The white Southerners relied desperately on the slaves. They made them do all their physical labor on the plantations. The vast majority of enslaved blacks worked in the cotton fields. The slaves helped their owners' business and industry. One of the most impactful events in U.S. history was the Civil War. The Civil War ended on April 9, 1865, after General Robert E. Lee and his Confederate armies surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant of the Union Army. The Confederate soldiers then moved back to the South, and the Union soldiers went back to the North. After their defeat in the Civil War, the South lost their rights as slave owners, and slavery was abolished. This caused the South to become financially unstable because their economy relied so heavily on slave labor. The North's economy remained stable, for most of the Civil War battles were fought on Southern soil. Therefore, they didn't have much rebuilding. After the Civil War, 4 million slaves were set free from the Southerners' grasp on them. They were allowed civil rights such as voting. Federal troops from the North then were put in the South to protect the newly freed slaves.
The Reconstruction era was a period of time after the Civil War when America worked to rebuild the South without slavery. The Reconstruction era lasted from 1865 to 1877. During this time period, Americans tried to eliminate the mistreatment of African Americans. To help enforce the beliefs of these Americans, soldiers were placed in the South. These soldiers were used to help maintain control of the South. The Southerners, however, disapproved of the North trying to change their treatment of slaves. Consequently, in the 1870s, Reconstruction began to fade. Americans now recognize the Reconstruction era to be a feeble attempt at giving African Americans a better place in society. In 1876, an election took place that would lead to the end of the Reconstruction era.
Governor Rutherford B. Hayes and Governor Samuel J. Tilden ran for president during the election of 1876. Samuel J. Tilden was the Democrat of the election. The Southerners, mostly being Democratic, voted for him. His vice president was Governor Hendricks. On the Republican side of the election was Rutherford B. Hayes with William A. Wheeler as his vice president. The North generally voted for him, as well as the recently freed slaves, because he was against slavery like the rest of the northern population.
Once all of the popular votes had been sent in and counted, Samuel J. Tilden had received 4,300,590 votes, and Rutherford B. Hayes finished with 4,036,298 votes. Tilden was the clear winner according to the popular vote. However, once the Electoral College had submitted all of their votes, confusion ensued. Because Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina all sent 2 sets of electoral votes to Congress, one from each political party, saying that their candidate had won for their state, the new president was undetermined for months.
On January 29, 1877, Congress formed the Electoral Commission, which was a committee that helped resolve the conflicted U.S. presidential election of 1876. This commission was a temporary group of people consisting of 15 members, 5 senators, 5 representatives, and 5 Supreme Court justices. Of the body, 7 members were Democrats and 8 were Republicans. The commission was given the same powers, if any, possessed by Congress. The resolution of the 20 electoral votes from the 4 disputed states would determine the election's winner, and unless rejected by both houses, the commission's conclusions were to remain final. Along party lines, the commission voted to give all the contested votes to Rutherford B. Hayes, which assured his victory.
The Compromise of 1877 was put in place to settle the disputed election of 1876 between Tilden and Hayes. As a result of the Compromise of 1877, Hayes won the election and went on to become the United States' 19th president if he agreed to the conditions. Hayes was to end the Reconstruction era, remove soldiers from the South, and send money from the government to help the South. Promising to do those things gained Hayes the votes that were necessary to winning the election. Overall, the Compromise of 1877 helped Rutherford B. Hayes win the election of 1876 and helped to restore peace between the North and the South.
On March 5, 1877, the new president, Rutherford B. Hayes, delivered his inaugural address.
We have assembled to repeat the public ceremonial begun by Washington, observed by all my predecessors, and now a time-honored custom which marks the commencement of a new term of the presidential office. I shall suggest certain important ends essential to the welfare of our country under the Constitution, with respect to the 2 distinct races whose relations to each other have brought upon us the deplorable complications which exist in those states. It must be a government which guards the interest of both races carefully and equally. I call upon you here and everywhere to unite with me in an earnest effort to secure to our country the blessings of justice, peace, and union, a union depending not upon the constraint of force, but upon the loving devotion of a free people.
Rutherford B. Hayes was respected, educated, intelligent, and cared immensely about the issues he faced. He kept his promise to follow through with the requirements of the Compromise of 1877. However, in resolving these immediate issues, new conflicts arose.
After the election of 1876 was bitterly ended by the Compromise of 1877, America had some responses to the bargain. 3 months after the election was resolved, Samuel J. Tilden spoke publicly for the first time about the whole dispute. Tilden was extremely devastated after losing this election, and he thought the outcome was as much a wrong to him as it was to everyone that voted for him. He alluded to the point that America believes in peaceful change in the government. Therefore, he encouraged the American citizens to try and stay calm throughout the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes. Tilden stated, "We must believe in the right and in the future. A great and noble nation will not sever its political from its moral life." The Compromise of 1877 also affected black civil rights. Once the Republicans removed the federal troops from the South, the Democrats in power vowed to recognize the civil and political equality of blacks. However, they did not follow through on this promise. Consequently, they inflicted Jim Crow segregation laws across the South, which deprived blacks of voting and other rights. Former slaves still didn't have a voice in society or the government. In turn, for the next 100 years, America would work to solve this conflict.
In resolving the election of 1876, the Compromise of 1877 helped to prevent another civil war in America and showed the rest of the world that America was, is, and will continue to stay united, even when conflicts arise.